today, honourable ministers, ladies and gentlemen, but in particular the youth that we have here today. My name is Siontek Teki. I'm one of the directors at the Pacific Islands Forum, and it's our pleasure to welcome you here to the Australian Pavilion for the intergenerational discussion between our political climate champions and global youth leaders. For those who had joined us yesterday, there was a political dialogue that occurred yesterday at the IOSIS Pavilion. This is second part of that, and in our view, this is the more important one, because this is the dialogue with our future leaders of tomorrow. And with just those few words, allow me to invite the Pacific Islands Forum Secretary General, Mr. Henry Puna, to say the keynote speech.
Thank you, Sione. Good evening, everybody. Honourable Ministers, Honourable Minister John Silk from RMI, Honourable Ainu from Niue, and our young people, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, kia orana, talofa lava, and welcome. You know, it's my great pleasure to be with you all this evening to talk about something that is really important and it's hardly been discussed. But also good to see so many familiar faces from last night at our event with the US, India, and China. You know, young people, I was so impressed with you last night. Your messages were so clear, so pure, and yet so short. So easy to remember what you said. And tonight I want to borrow some of the sayings that you left behind last night, because for me they resonated so strongly, and it made us all think seriously about the important issue that we will be talking about tonight: youth leadership on climate change. Somebody said this last night, that our islands will still be here in 100 years, that we are independent and sovereign states, place we will forever call home. The other one is that the bones of our ancestors will rest untouched by the encroaching sea, and the next generation of youth will not have to collect our bones and the bones of our loved ones like seashells on the beach. Very, very powerful saying. However, being heard is one thing. Changing and driving change is something else, particularly driving it from the ground up. You know, young people, I'm so pleased to see so many of you here at COP28. Because the truth is, you have more moral authority to talk about climate change than any of us, than any leader. Because when we talk about climate change, we are talking about your future, aren't we? And so you have every right to be right in the center and right at the forefront of any discussions about climate change. And I can see so many capable young leaders here tonight. So good to see you. You know, I remember back in COP26 in Glasgow, at the opening plenary, all the leaders were making their statements, and yet there was one statement that stuck with me since then, and I thought it was the best statement at that plenary session. And it was from a young Samoan girl, Brianna Fruin. You know, because what she said came straight from there, not from a piece of paper or from up there. It came from the heart. And it was so wonderful. And since then, I have been committed to ensuring that the youth of the region and indeed of the whole world, that your voices are heard. And that is something that I want to raise tonight. How can we make the voices of our young people, not just from the region, but throughout the world, more prominent to allow them to be heard at important meetings like COPs? I think I may be straying a bit from my script, but this is very important to me. I actually think that we should give consideration to changing the structure of COP meetings. You know, the youth voices are being marginalized. You know, we hear them in side events, in small rooms, where often we are competing with noises from other rooms within the same building. But your voices are not being heard where they should be heard. And so I mentioned with some people from Al Gore's office in Washington today that that is something we should all work towards ensuring that the voices of our young people are heard more, are amplified and given center stage here at COP meetings. And this is something that I will seriously raise with our Australian friends. He is hoping that Australia will win the bid to host COP31. They've already committed to calling it the Pacific COP. And they've already committed to sitting down with the Pacific to talk about the format and the structure of the COP31. Fingers crossed that they will succeed. Because that is something that I want to raise when we sit down with Canberra. How can we amplify the voice of our young ones? How we can bring them to center stage at this global conference like COP, instead of being in side events and in small rooms where they're not heard by the rest of the world, but largely by our own people from the Pacific. So that is one issue. And the other one is, I have spoken to some of my team that we should look at ensuring that in future COPs, that young people from our countries in the Pacific are an integral and important part of our delegations. And I know that there are some friends out there who are wanting to hear that and to support it. And that is something I can assure you that we will be working on to bring it to fruition, to make it happen. The other point I wanted to touch base on tonight, just leave it for you to think about, is this. Recently, earlier this year, the Pacific Islands Forum signed an MOU with ASEAN. And today I had a bilateral, very, very nice bilateral with the Secretary General of CARICOM. We are committed to signing an MOU when Caribbean hosts the next SIDS conference in May of this year. And I was just wondering, if we can combine our resources and our influence in order to bring the young people of these regions together to start a movement where the youth voice must be heard and can be heard. So that is something that we will be working on. I will be personally working on that initiative to make sure that it happens. So young people, this is your night. We want to hear your voices, and thank you so much for your participation last night. It resonated so well, and it will continue to resonate. And let's hope that the changes that I mentioned can be brought about so that your voices can have a more central role in future COP meetings. Thank you, and all the very best.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And now we have the pleasure, I have the pleasure to call upon a youth from the Republic of Marshall Islands who will say a poem and provide a song.
Yagoyan, good evening, everyone. My name is Cardi,
I'm Jawar.
and we are both part of the Republic of the Marshall Islands Youth Delegation. We were first introduced into the climate space when we had joined a climate youth art seminar that was organized by an NGO called Jojigum, which was co-funded by Kathy, our boss. So when we had first joined this climate arts seminar, it really inspired us to compose a song. And Jabor will explain more on that.
So this is a story about the first time we experienced firsthand the impacts of climate change. The song also serves as a beacon of hope and a reminder for the youth to continue to be resilient in the fight against the tides. And as we look into our national adaptation plan, this song is also meant to encourage the youth to continue to be proactive and to work together in order to secure a safe environment for our future and the future of the generations to come. Hit it. Little switch. 비그비그나기 온라제 가을eng langday bunin joru ebungadon mizelze ay bozozin alagale bubu yao da boai dang jile Mana ay lengay Jauh nghe về chăm lo Al ngong Tình mình gain res walo Nghe chụp kia en as ngep Jenny pinron Him gaga mana ay lengay Nghe chụp kia en as ngep Sinipin ron Yung gagaman ay lengay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think, Christelle, that's a very tough act to follow. But I've got the pleasure of inviting our facilitator, Ms. Christelle Pratt. She is the Assistant Secretary of OACPS, and actually my former boss, Deputy Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum before she left for a new posting. So let me invite Christelle to take the floor and also introduce the panel.
Well, thank you very much, Sione, and you're absolutely right. You took the words right out of my mouth, and people seem to be doing that to me all day today. So, there we are. But, I do feel that we do have an excellent panel that will join me here on stage. But I'd like to thank Secretary General Puna for his extremely inspiring words and his commitment to our youth leaders. Thank you very much, Secretary General. But also I recognise some honourable ministers here and welcome to this evening's event, because I think as UN Secretary General, not UN, I've just promoted you. Do you like that? Yes. But SG Puna said this really is an important event wherein we did have an excellent meeting yesterday evening with a number of political leaders on stage, not only our own, but also from China, from the US, as well as from India. And so this evening, we're going to hear from our youth leaders. In fact, I might just invite to the stage, and I hope there's enough chairs actually, are there?
You'll be standing.
What did I do in a previous life? But the Honourable Mona Ainui, Minister for Natural Resources and Pacific Political Climate Champion for Gender Equality and Social Inclusion. Welcome, Honourable Minister. We also have Kushla Munro, the Head of Delegation for Australia at COP28. I'm not sure how to address you. I did sit next to somebody, but Excellency, how does that sound? Please join us here on stage. And now to other leaders, our youth leaders. Matoya Lahir from Papua New Guinea. Member of Secretary General Puna's Pacific Youth Climate Leaders Alliance. Aisha Siddiqa, UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Damilola Hamid Balagan, Nigeria Chief Executive Officer, Youth Sustainable Development Network. Angelica Mantikas, Australian Youth for International Climate Engagement. Nicole Hutton, Indigenous Youth Campaigner from Garawa country in the south of the Gulf of Carpentaria, Australia. So we do have a number of chairs, and I think it's really unfair that I have to stand. Do I have to? Could we get rid of this? It's just more imposing. I've got to make a confession. I have something called shaky leg disease when I'm a bit dehydrated and I fall over, literally. And so I didn't want that embarrassment. But I'm your moderator this evening, and I think that this particular side event, climate leadership we need, climate leadership we demand, is extremely important. And I think that our panelists here on stage with me will take centre stage, both political champions and leaders, and youth champions and leaders. So I think as Secretary General Puna said, he did see a number of very familiar faces in the crowd this evening who were at yesterday's high-level event in the AOSIS Pavilion. And of course, there was a call, and I think Secretary Puna did sort of sum that up with several quotes that he took from the Pacific Youth Warriors call. And I feel that particular call sums up well what we want and what we need to do to address the climate emergency. So while we have made some strides, we are still off track in ensuring that we meet the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement, because it is absolutely crucial that we do, and it is a metric that must be non-negotiable, because so much hinges on it. Our lives and our very existence depends. For this, leadership at all levels is key. For this, financing will be key. For this, partnership will be key. But there have been some excellent examples of leadership by youth and Pacific leaders, and I think we should recognise those. In respect of the ICJ advisory opinion on states' obligations, in respect of climate change, and also on the very long battle that our countries have fought to establish the Loss and Damage Fund. But of course, there are many, many other examples where Pacific leaders and Pacific youth leaders have shown such an example to the world at this important time. But we will now just move to hearing from the panel. And so I've got a number of questions, and what I'd like to do is perhaps ask a question and not necessarily pose it to any particular person, and just allow you to speak from your heart. And I'd like this particular dialogue to also be as interactive as possible. But my first question is to our youth leaders. And the question is, the world is way off track with the climate action that is needed and committed to under the Paris Agreement. To what extent is this a failure of leadership? And what can we do? In fact, what must we do about it, given the gravity of the situation that we find ourselves in? And so, who wants to take first picks?
I can
Please.
take it to start the conversation, get everything flowing. Yeah, first of all, thank you for having us here and for convening this dialogue today. I think it's an incredibly important conversation and collaboration. It's great that we're all here. But I guess in terms of leadership, the way I'd start is it's not a complete failure of leadership, right? It's a failure of global leadership. It's a failure of our world leaders who are here. It's a failure of a lot of our political leaders. And it's a failure to actually acknowledge the leadership of local communities, of the people who are being most affected, and the leadership that they're already giving. So it's not a complete failure of leadership on their behalf, because they've been leading the fight, they've been leading knowledge for thousands of years when it comes to these issues. It is a failure on our part for those people sitting in these rooms making these decisions to not listen to them and to not elevate their voices. Because the reason why we're in this mess is because we never listened to the people who had that connection to the land, to the oceans, to the mountains, and who knew about these issues before scientists started calling them out. We have had the indigenous knowledge, we have had the connection to the land for thousands of years. We have had elders telling us what is wrong, and I'm sure there are people here who are have much stronger experience to talk about it than I do. But our failure is in not listening to them. That is our failure at the end of the day. And another failure is in not listening to young people. You know, we love to talk about youth leadership. We love to say, oh yes, we have some youth on our panel and some youth in our here and there. But youth leadership is not only listening to young people when it suits you. It's not just picking the things here and there that young person agrees with you and it suits your agenda. It is fully owning exactly what young people are saying, even in the criticisms when it doesn't suit you, because that is what meaningful engagement looks like. That's what real leadership looks like. That is what taking ownership of the mistakes that have occurred, because there have been many, and I think we're all here because we know there are many mistakes that have been made. But to correct those mistakes takes leadership, takes consultation, takes listening, and it takes taking a step back to allow for those who know and who have the solutions to come forward and to give them. So yeah, I would say it's just a failure to actually engage with the real leaders who have been leading the fight from day one.
Thank you very much, Angelica. And I think that the response by you, Secretary General Puna, I think hopefully will address some of that as we move forward and towards COP31. But if I might just cross the ocean a little bit and then to your right, Dami, would you like to make a brief intervention here? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again for this opportunity to communicate on the pressing issue as far as sustainable development is concerned, climate change, and even existential threats it has on human race. I think for me, just to add up to what she said, not communicating and not collaborating with the real leaders is the main issue here. So one thing I've noticed over time is the fact that young people are seen as complementary stakeholders, and they are not seen as key stakeholders. And I think the moment that narrative changes, then we can say that we are building an inclusivity towards sustainable development and even addressing pressing problems such as climate change. So in essence, what I'm saying is the fact that stakeholders have to understand that whatever they want to do, they have to put young people as key stakeholders and not see them as complementing whatever decision they decide to make. And the essence of this is the fact that when we talk of sustainable development, it is all about yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so in order to achieve a better tomorrow, it is only important that you work with the present such that you're able to achieve a prosperous future. And that's what I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dami, and may this moment be the beginning, we hope, and a commitment by Australia, we hope, for COP31. But I think, in fact, in 3 years, it's going to almost be too late. We need to maybe start from this moment, seeing how we look at this level of inclusivity, leaders of all walks of life and kind and levels. But if I could move now to your right, Dami, and to take from Aisha, whether, in fact, you might want to bring sort of a UN perspective to this, or your own local or personal perspective is fine too.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Aisha Siddiqa. I'm from the Mochiwala people of Pakistan, and I have the privilege and honor to advise Secretary Antonio Guterres on meaningful youth engagement and youth representation. I think the answer to that really lies in the way that society is structured. Young people cannot vote. We, especially children, don't have the ability to pay taxes, and therefore they cannot influence with their money. As government is a body that was written, government is the parent of the citizens. It is the thing that is elected to keep these citizens safe. And young people, not just from children, are not only under the responsibility of their mother and father, they're also under the responsibility of a government. That is why they are vulnerable. When climate change occurs in fast onset events and slow onset events, it really alters the physical being of kids. Recent science is telling us after a hurricane, after a typhoon, after massive flooding, children, especially infants who have now gone through disaster, have changes in their mental chemistry. Their processing, their trauma responses increase. As they grow older, they have more difficulty settling into society, and we're seeing climate anxiety increase because you don't feel safe on planet Earth. Now, if you go narrow that down, when a person, when a species, when an animal is in an unsafe environment, they are unable to progress. Scale that up massively, where do you go? Your home is not safe, workplace is not safe. Anytime, any moment, something could happen and your entire existence is in danger. And so that is why youth involvement is fundamentally important. It is more than a stakeholder. And then also, this is more spiritual, but young people are closer to the beginning of life as we know it. And this crisis is the fight for life. So the Honorable Secretary mentioned young people stating that their bones of their ancestors will be like shells that is left to collect, and the purity with which they speak. That purity comes from not bravery. It comes from being closer to the beginning of life because you understand how absolutely important it is. And by young people, I also mean children. And I worry that as we grow older, we tend to lose that.
Well, thank you very much, Aisha, and for really taking it down to an absolute granular level and to the ground and to the heart. Now, if we could turn to you, please, Angelica.
Oh, my name's Nicole, and
Oh, no, hang on a second, Nicole.
No, that's okay.
I beg your pardon. I'm really losing the plot. Please.
Thank you very much for having me today. My name's Nicole, and I'm a Garo woman, so I am from the east of Borroloola in the Northern Territory of Australia. And I come from a community of people who have been, we're talking about leadership, and I completely agree with what you said earlier about how the leadership failure is not that of our communities, because our communities are leading. I completely agree with that, and in fact, it was exactly what I thought as soon as I heard the question. In my community in Borroloola in the Northern Territory, and a bunch of communities around the Beetaloo Basin, we are threatened with fracking, a type of gas extraction. And I can't believe that I'm here in 2023 saying that it's a new project that is currently in an exploratory phase right now. And we have leaders out there that are allowing these corporations to come in and open a brand new gas basin and extracting a new fossil fuel out of the ground when we're already seeing the impacts of climate change happening to communities right now. They're still letting that happen. And if this project was to go ahead for Australia, it's not compatible with the 1.5 degree of that we want to prevent. So we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground, and we can't let our leaders keep making decisions that don't align with what our communities need, what our communities want, because our communities are calling for a stop to fossil fuels extraction. And I think that we need to stop putting corporations before people, because the next generation, we've seen young people standing up and striking from school because they know exactly what is going to happen if we keep letting corporations and politicians and governments just keep running rife with our lives and our future.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And now to Matoya. If you could just very briefly answer that question, and then we'll move forward. I've got 4 questions, but I think we might stay with 3, because, of course, we want each question to be quite well ventilated. But Matoya, please.
Good plan night and hano buena mona everyone. My colleagues have made some very powerful statements, and if I can run with the momentum just to briefly answer the question. I guess I come from a community that's 97% of the land is still customarily owned and 3% by the state. And much like other small Pacific islands, we have a strong connection to our land that extends beyond, before we had industrialization and development, and we're still very much well connected to those lands. So in my understanding, I think we all know political will is what drives the advancement of this conversation of climate change, and we need good leadership to make those tailored policies that ultimately affect the science that we've seen. In my experience, I think the biggest challenge is the translation of those policies that are decided here on the high level. When we take that back to our home countries and we try to translate that into our own legislations and to effect it in our communities to make that change, that's where the impact comes in, because many a times it does not take into account what's present and happening in our countries. That's the connections we have to our land, the systems that we have in place of our ownership of land and how we deal with our lands and all that. They do not account for that. It does not account for our engagements with how we are as communities and villages, the systems that we've had in place over many years that have worked very much like my colleagues have stated. So it's not a failure of the leadership completely, because we do have that present, and we have a lot of good leaders that are recognizing that need to have and to recognize those important, the real leaders, the community, the young people who I believe bring in sort of the element of common sense and bring the human element back into this conversation. So I think if we could focus our efforts back on that, bring it down to that community nuclear level, I think it would bring a lot of effective change to this conversation that I don't think high-level policy and science could ever do.
Well, thank you, Matoya, and I think that in many ways you've provided an excellent segue for the next question to our political and policy leaders that are on the panel today. And having heard our youth leaders, my question to you is, what, if anything, gives you hope when you look at global action on climate change? So we've had 28 COPs. We're here in Dubai. There have been some great announcements. There's been some disappointments as well. So as a political leader and as a leader for the Blue Pacific, what, if anything, gives you hope when you look at global action on climate change? Honourable Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christelle, and good evening to everyone. Happy Gender Day. I'm glad to say this is the second panel that I'm on that has one male. Give it up for a very, very strong person to be in the middle here, and also applauding me because I'm very old. In between these beautiful young women, I feel very privileged to be here. I think, I don't know if my energy is strong enough to keep up with the conversation, but thank you so much. I want to applaud all the young ladies, or the young people here on stage for your articulate views on your positions as youth leaders and your commitment to your cause, or our cause, especially on climate change. This is my second COP, and I hear a lot. We talk a lot in the political level. I haven't really gotten back in to the negotiations this time around, but I'm hoping that something will happen, some positive change will happen. I hear a lot of what the leaders are saying, calling on us to call them out, to push back, push on them to act, to achieve some of the goals that we have undertaken to commit ourselves. But, you know, I hear many numbers as well. I hear a lot of figures being thrown around. I really want for this COP to make some concrete decisions for us, especially for us in the Pacific and our youth. I know you've done a huge amount of campaigning on our behalf as small island states, and especially from the Pacific. But I think when we talk about leaders failing what decisions need to be made, you're absolutely correct. And I am ashamed to be one of those leaders who really have tried very, very hard from the Pacific to fight for our people, for our young people. So tonight I thought I'll come here and just listen, because I think it's very important. A lot of what we do, we don't seem to hear your voices, so listening is very important. So I want to take back some of what you've said, but absolutely, my hope is for us to achieve at least one concrete, positive decision on where we are at COP. I'm not sure of that.
No, that's perfectly fine, and I'll come back with another question in a moment, Honourable Minister. But to you,
Thank you, Crystal. And just firstly, welcome. It is such a great honour to be on this stage with so many inspiring young people. And thank you also, Minister and Secretary-General Puna. What gives me hope? So for me, my first COP that I ever went to was Copenhagen. And that was not a good one. That was a disaster, yeah. And I think we came out of that, like just scratching our heads, thinking we can't even ever go back in those rooms. It was, it just felt like it was just all despair. So now I'm up to COP9. I've done some other things in between. But what fills me with hope is that we ever got Paris Agreement, you know, that effort that was just year after year. And we know it's not enough, and that's the whole point in terms of where we are now. We have this global stocktake. We know we're not on track. We know we have to do more. We know that there's the leadership. We know we've got to just keep going. But again, the thing that gives me hope, in some ways, it is when we are connecting and thinking and understanding. And I think you said it so well in terms of the common sense, but it's also drive, because I know that it can be really tiring, right? And that energy, that enthusiasm, that push is really important. So that's what gives me hope.
Well, thank you very much. And so I guess now to my question to our youth leaders again, and if you could keep this, if you like, within several short sentences, because it's one of those elevator pitches, okay? But the question is, if you were addressing global leaders tomorrow, what would you say to them? And so I'm going to start with Matoya, because she waited so patiently, and then we'll move down through to Nicole, Aisha, Dami, and please.
Thank you, Christelle. I guess to keep it brief, I'd summarize it into 3 main points. The first one would be climate finance and adaptation support. As small Pacific Island states, PSIDs, we need commitment to following through to the commitments that have already been made. And the key term here is making that climate finance accessible. And if not, then committing to the innovative drives that are being made. I know that there's a lot of development in that space. I've recently come across the PRF, for example, and we've had some strong statements made by, yesterday by, by Senator Kerry, apologies. Just to continue with that momentum, the second one would be ambitious emissions reductions. I know that's something that goes around a lot, and I know they're very stingy about it, and most of the time it's really a statement that's made, but I think it's about making those bold moves to lead the other countries with those. And I think the third one would be a just transition, especially in the Pacific Island states. We have a lot of indigenous communities, women and children, especially if I may focus on a gender issue particularly, the onset of climate change already impacts, it accentuates those issues. So I would say to focus on that as well. I know there's not a lot of focus given to gender and social inclusion, but I'd say that's very key for the PSIDs as well. Just keep it that.
And Nicole, your elevator pitch.
Hopefully I can make this brief. This is my first COP. I've never been here ever before. And when I'm walking around the street, I'm looking at people and I'm like, oh, they must care about our climate. They're here to try and make our world a better place. But then I realized that COP actually opens its doors to fossil fuel corporations and executives and CEOs. So I think if I was to say anything to the world leaders, it would be you should be listening to those people who really care about our future, who care about our world, not those who want to make a profit off it. Because the amount of times that, these people are getting into rooms with the fossil fuel corporations and not with us. I haven't been in any of these rooms. I'm in a room with all of you who are lovely people, but, people like us aren't being invited into these spaces, but I know who is. And I also would want to ask them what kind of legacy they want to leave. I'm sure they're working hard to improve their careers and be the best that they can be, but in 50 years, how are we going to look back at them?
I don't want to generalize with all world leaders, so I have very specific people I want to talk to. The United States, Canada, China, India, Russia. The UNFCCC process is not working. If you spend the time you spend on giving panels, on actually fulfilling the policies and promises, maybe we would be further. I think that the abundance of this performance is getting exhausting. We are all collectively exhausted by it. A cop like this costs hundreds of millions of dollars. That's saving an entire community. That's less than what was committed into the loss and damage fund. Frankly, a country like the United States put $15 million into the loss and damage fund. My country flooded last year. That displaced 60 million people. That is less than a quarter given to each individual that was displaced. That's 25 pennies. That's nothing. And it was mentioned before, I don't blame my elders. I don't blame my mother. I don't blame my father. I don't blame my community, because they were not responsible. The climate crisis has very, very particular names and addresses of the people that are behind them. And that is not to suggest blaming and shaming. That is to suggest that we've got to get a little bit more strategic. And even the Pacific is doing everything it possibly can. Small island states. And a country like Pakistan and developing countries, they come to this conference again and again and again, because this is the place that finally their voices are heard. This is the place that John Kerry will finally sit with my prime minister and talk to him. There are second class and first class and third class citizens at an event like this. And I don't think, if we really want an equitable world, a mechanism that is operating so fundamentally on inequality, so fundamentally undemocratic, can get us there. So yeah, that's my message to those very, very particular people and countries.
We've named them. Thanks, Aisha. Dami, add to that.
Thank you very much. That's a good question. So, as a lawyer and someone who is action-oriented, I would suggest just two things. And actually, I met with my president, the president of Nigeria, day before yesterday, and these were the things I told him, particularly from the African context and the Nigerian reality. So two things. First, policy recommendation. It is important that whatever policy is to be formulated and implemented, they should be subjected to generational tests. So what is the impact of this policy on young people, and what is the impact of this policy on generation yet unborn? I think that is very important. And so working on that policy is very important. Number two is sustainable entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur, and then I've come to realize that when we want to address problems, it is important that we move the perspective from just creating economic prosperity, which has led us to where we are right now. So it is important that we integrate social and ecological as much as we prioritize economic prosperity together, such that we are able to achieve tangible results. To put in perspective, Nigeria and Africa, for example, we still need to prosper when it comes to economic development. It is very crucial for us, as much as we have issues around climate change and just energy transition. And so policies that would intersect developmental targets such that we are able to achieve our economic prosperity and even social and ecological targets will be very, very important, especially that young people, being over 80 million in Nigerian population, being at the heart of this policy will go a long way to achieving a sustainable world and a resilient future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd echo the generational point. I think it's really important that we start to measure the actual impacts of these policies on future generations, because it's not something we're doing. And to extend on that, we need to reevaluate our economic systems. The way that we measure success right now is it's on a GDP basis. We literally measure our success based on how much stuff we produce and consume in a year. The stuff that is causing this crisis, we measure it as success. How absolutely bonkers is that?
So first and foremost, I would say let's maybe reevaluate that and think of a bit more of a sustainable way of living. And there are alternative ways that actually prioritize our communities, that prioritize well-being and connection, and that really put an emphasis on those things. So changing the way we measure success in our society is incredibly important. Second thing is kind of going on from that is recognizing the interconnection of all of these different aspects of society. Health, well-being, education. I have a fly that's flying around my face. The interconnection of things in our society. Recognizing the interconnection, whether it's the natural world, you can't have, I was talking, this fly is a messenger. I was talking about this yesterday. You know, we have the UNFCCC COP to talk about climate change. Then we have the UNCBD to talk about biodiversity. You have different COPs for everything. You have desertification. We're talking about Antarctica in another COP. All these different events, but they're all interconnected. So we need our systems to recognize that interconnection and to recognize the effects that they have on all other aspects of society as well. And the last point I will say, and this is specifically in response to yesterday's event where we were talking about unabated fossil fuels. You cannot carbon capture your way out of the climate crisis. You cannot continue to build new coal mines and just say, oh, as long as we're sucking the carbon out of the atmosphere, it's fine. Because you are completely disregarding the issues and the ways of thinking that caused this crisis in the first place.
So thank you very much, Angelica. You'll notice that I'm not really responding or summarising because there is going to be somebody who's going to do that at the end of the of this particular discussion, and I will invite her to sum up in a moment. However, there is a final question, and this is to our political and policy champions. And it's sort of, if you like, the flip side of the question that I asked our youth leaders. So in addressing our youth leaders today, what do you want to say to them? And what would you, in fact, want to communicate in terms of a commitment? And we've heard quite a number of commitments this evening, starting with Secretary-General Puna. So in addressing our youth leaders today, what do you want to say to them here on stage, here in the room, and there outside as we move forward? Honourable Minister.
Gosh, that's a big one for a politician. How do you articulate that? I really am very appreciative of the fact that youth voices are being heard. From this end, I guess, we just have to, as political leaders, we just have to make sure that we elevate our own selves up there to the global community. I know we talk a lot in the Pacific in regards to what our activities, what our aspirations as governments, but really, like a lot of the voices that we have heard, it's at the other level. The global community needs to listen. So for the youth here, you're doing a lot. I don't expect that you should be doing any more, but you have committed yourselves on this goal and on this path to lead us. I have a lot of confidence, and I guess I really want you to continue, but I also want us as political leaders to maybe be on the same understanding as you and pushing your objectives, pushing your voices forward. But at COP, I would think that really it's something that if we're going to the next COP or COP 31, that is we're hoping to bring to the Pacific, I think that we are listening and we're hearing what you're saying. But yeah, please forgive us for not really reaching where we should be reaching now. Forgive us with our decisions that are not maybe as amicable as we should reach. And we can only try our best to try and achieve some of the goals. I know there's a lot of talk at these types of conferences, and I understand there's COP climate change, COP biodiversity. I totally understand. There's a lot of talk, but please be patient and give us time. I know we have a moral obligation as leaders to ensure that our young people are heard, our young people find a platform to voice your opinions and your views and your statements. So please continue what you're doing. We will try our best to work with you.
And if I can just briefly add, I mean, well, thank you for coming. I mean, we're listening. We know there hasn't been enough and we need to do more. I think keeping the hope, keeping the optimism from just from the beautiful song that was sung to us, that spirit is so important to be able to keep alive. Just going back to Secretary General Puna's remarks at the beginning, there's this opportunity in terms of Australia with the Pacific, thinking about what would it be to hold COP31. What does it mean to do it in a different way? I completely agree. In some ways, it feels too much sometimes in terms of what the COPs have become. But the point being, whose are those voices? How are we amplifying them? How are they part of that? And that's a very different, unique opportunity. And that doesn't just because it's something off in the distance. It kind of starts now, and then you build from that. So that's what I wanted to say.
Well, thank you very much for that commitment. And I think, as you say, it has to start now if we're going to be able to realise that in a few years' time in Australia at COP31. I'm being optimistic, you see. COP31 will be in Australia. We'll publish that. But there were a couple of sort of I words that I took from this discussion. I mean, this intergenerational imperative, the need for inclusivity, the need beyond inclusivity to be included and involved, you know, and involving all leaders, regardless of at what level they are. I think that really is something that not only do we need to take away from this, but we need to really act on it and be very intentional about it. But I've really been quite lucky because I don't actually have to make any summary of this, because I'm going to invite Miss Samoa, Moe Moana. Is it Shenke? Have I pronounced that correctly? It was close. Goodness gracious. You can reprimand me. But Moe Moana will make the summary, and I'm sure she'll be far more eloquent than I am. You can borrow this.
Seu le manu ai tangai le ngalu. Seu le manu ai tangai le ngalu. Talofa lava, Pacific greetings. I would just like to acknowledge our honourable ministers as well as our youth panellists for your very passionate sharing and for reinstilling my own hope for the future. My name is Moe Moana, and I was very honoured to moderate yesterday's session for the 1.5 to Stay Alive dialogue that happened. Yesterday I moderated the discussion in my traditional Samoan attire, and I think the most prominent of my attire was my headdress that I wore called a tuinga. In Samoa, this is not just for show, this is a statement. It is one of our most sacred measina, or treasures, something that we've been able to preserve over generations. And wearing the tuinga is a privilege because it's usually reserved for people of status and rank. But as Miss Samoa, I was very honored to wear this attire. In Samoa, this is our warrior attire for processions, for dance, and to go to war. I also wore it not only for Samoa and to acknowledge my Prime Minister of Samoa as chair of AOSIS, but for the entire Pacific and all of our small island states who face the brunt of the climate crisis.
It was a tribute to all of our warriors that we see here, our leaders in negotiation rooms and at grassroots levels, who are leading our collective efforts to ensure climate action. And in these settings like yesterday, we are only stronger in solidarity as united small island states and as Indigenous people who hold deep connections to our lands. Yesterday's dialogue occurred between esteemed Pacific leaders and partners and representatives from Australia, India, the US, and China. As we know, the US, China, and India are our largest carbon polluters in the world that directly export destruction onto our islands. And to have these representatives from high-emitting nations in one space was definitely a small win for us and a milestone and something that needs to happen more often. Our Pacific youth and our Pacific leaders put forth a challenge for an ambitious and urgent scale-up in climate action for these countries. Our youth and leaders challenge major emitters present to enhance their commitments, including aligning with their NDCs, with the 1.5 degree to stay alive, promoting the development and transfer to clean and renewable energy, phasing out fossil fuel, with developing countries and our small island states taking the lead. Our Pacific youth and Pacific climate warriors made a very powerful and direct call with my hope for my islands. And the calls were about the Pacific vision for the Power Up Declaration. And while we can celebrate the small wins that we have here at COP, they also stated that there is no hope for the future of our islands without phasing out fossil fuels. Senator John Kerry spoke about his alignment and the US presidency's alignment with the 1.5 goal and how the reality and science states that there is no future without phasing out fossil fuels. We also heard the same from China and India, but in interventions, it did feel like a constant deflection from their own actions as the largest carbon-emitting nations. I would also like to make a small correction from a China representative who stated that they are part of the Pacific, I think in a way to try and liken our challenges as small island states. But of course we know this is not geographically correct or in any other way correct. Convening these nations was a challenge, so I would like to express deep gratitude to the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. Henry Puna, thank you. One of the main takeaways is how can we translate the dialogue from yesterday into something credible for our islands, which our speakers have shared a lot today, so thank you. Every year at COP, we hear several pledges, negotiations, and commitments from states and companies, but what we don't always hear is the follow-up. Have they actually delivered on their promises? As a young person, everything that I observe here at COP, I'm going to take back to my island of Samoa and continue to build our young people and communities to be able to understand all the technical challenges and issues that happen here at COP. The way forward is continuing to meaningfully engage and influence the communities that we are all a part of. I know it's something small, but it all makes a difference. I would like to acknowledge the Pacific Islands Forum and special mention to Melania and Sione for allowing a young person to moderate, and I hope that we can keep opening doors for our young people so that we can remind our world leaders of the adverse impacts of climate change and how it is our daily reality. Hence, seole manu ai tangai le ngalu. As a seasoned fisherman will catch the bird, we must be wary of the wave. And as we forge forward, may we never forget the realities of our small islands. And, you know, as we continue to come up with world leaders, remind them to remember us and never forget about us. Because for me, this is a fight for my ancestors and our present generations and future generations. So I wish you all the best for the rest of COP28, and may we stay hopeful in our fight for the future of our islands. Thank you.
All right. Well, this ends the moderated session, and I'm going to yield back to Sione, Teki, to take the floor, but I'd really like to thank our panellists this evening, and I'm sure that you would like to thank them as well. It's been a really enriching dialogue, and there will be more of these, and hopefully in delegations, in rooms, and of course still inside events, but a big difference from this moment forth. Thank you very much. Sione, thank you.
Thank you. And I think you've said all the thanks, but can we just get everybody here just for a group photo, please? And Wayana, would you be able to join everyone as well, please? And Secretary General, if you could come up. Yeah. If we could just